just if you would just start with your name, and you can look at Holly the whole time.
Okay.
Start with your name and then spell it for me, please.
Okay. So my name is Santiago, and I am assistant professor with the Animal Science and Kellogg Biological Station.
And how do you spell your name?
UTSUMI.
Okay, and then Santiago?
Santiago, SANTIAGO.
Okay. Go ahead. You can just start doing it.
So let's start with describing what was going on. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about what the students were doing over while Craig was videotaping?
Okay, so today what you've been seeing in the field is part of several pieces of research that we are doing here at the dairy farm that focuses primarily on sustainable development, right, of pasture-based dairy farms, right? So you've been seeing students driving an ATV vehicle that is having laser equipment for precise measurement of pasture biomass. Then you've been seeing students collecting some pasture samples that goes to detailed monitoring of the plant growth and forage quality right throughout the year that we do here. And then you also been seeing students that were handling some cows that were some GPS equipment that we use to track all the spatial and temporal movements of the cows with regard to our farming practices.
What do those social, so you're tracking social, behavioral type things, what does that tell you? I mean,
yeah, that is a unique line of research because you need to think that one of our major innovations here at the station is to be one of the first or earlier adopters of automatic milking systems, and that means that we are moving now into a situation where the cows start milking voluntarily, right? So all of the movements and the decisions that the cows do with regard to whether to go to pasture to eat, right, or stay there resting as part of a social group or moving around the system to be milked with the equipment is voluntarily, right? So it's very important for us to understand what factors are driving, right, the decisions behind these cows, right, to visiting voluntarily the milking units.
And so a lot of the research that's going on here is looking at long-term ecological research. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that and the role it plays in the research you're doing here?
Yes, of course. I would say that is the foundation, and that is part of the philosophy here at the station, right, on a strong commitment on sustainability. And when we talk about sustainability, many of the metrics or responses, at least in agriculture sustainability, are long-term, right? So here what we are trying to focus is to track over time all of the socio-economic responses and environmental impacts of pasture-based dairy systems, right? And that means a whole set of integration of responses that go from, the production efficiency, right, and the economics of pastoral agriculture in dairy, up to all of the environmental impacts, greenhouse gases, carbon cycles, and nutrients, right, that happen in a pasture-based dairy farm. The line of work that we do in relation to greenhouse gases and the relationships, right, to future climate change or ongoing climate change is very important for us. And that line of work is related, right, to our long-term goals of research work here at the dairy farm.
So that plays into why maybe the general public who might be viewing this video, why they might be interested. Can you talk a little bit about the impact on what's, our generations now, but also the future generations? I mean, this is research that's very important too.
That is a very interesting question and point of view for us here, because in general, even though if we are working with some kind of traditional form of agriculture, right? Pastoral agriculture or pasture-based dairy production. It's like what we are introducing is new tools, new equipment, new technologies that we believe will assist the new generations, right, of farmers, right, to be competitive and to stay, right, in business, right? And that package of technologies, of course, goes from the innovations with the automatic milking systems, but at the same time, a whole set of equipment, as I told you recently, like laser equipment, right, to do more detailed analysis of the pasture growth or the quality of the pastures, to GPS tracking to understand movements or to apply that information, right, into a meaningful, management, right, practice. So our idea behind this research of what we do is to generate more cost-effective, more, I would say, overall effective practices for new generation, right, of farmers to have them more enthusiastic, right, and stay on the farms, right, in the future. So, yeah, I think that is basically, I didn't like much my response on that, but it's okay.
Oh, I thought it was good.
Yeah.
What can you talk a little bit about the importance of having a facility like this that, from a researcher's perspective, what it allows you to do that you might not be able to do anywhere else?
Yeah. So for me, and this is my personal feeling, and I appreciate Michigan State for giving me this opportunity, which is at the same time a challenge for a young faculty like me, is that here we are putting together several pieces that otherwise you cannot really do quality research, right? If, for example, in a commercial setting. And I would say all this facility, what is allowing us, or at least myself to do, is to really anticipate what I think dairy farmers are going to face in, let's say, in the future, in, let's say, the next 15, 20 years, right? And try to come up with effective solutions to many of those challenges that the farmers are going to face. And particularly in the areas of socioeconomic, as we've been talking, new generation of farmers. At the same time, coming up with more cost-effective practices that will allow farmers in the future to develop more resistant or resilient, right, production systems with regard to variations, right, in production costs or market and prices. And in the area of environment, with farming practices that will allow farmers to be more efficient in the way that they are using land and natural resources, right, to produce, in our case, milk, right? And that means developing feeding systems or land use practices that will reduce that footprint impact, for example, of carbon, right, in producing milk, or mitigating the overall emissions of greenhouse gases, right, per unit of milk that is being produced. So as a summary, I would say we are taking the lead on many of the challenges that the farmers are going to face in the next 15, 20 years, right?
So a lot of the work you're doing here is obviously applied on the farm. Can you talk a little bit, though, about the general public and what that means to them? I mean, how does that impact, or why should they be interested or concerned about this type of research?
Yeah, I would like to split the answer in two parts. I would say the one part is, as part of our core mission, right, in a land grant, I would say, we are using this facility as a very important outreach avenue. So, for example, happened yesterday that we had an open house, and that was, the audience was the general public, right? Mostly consumers, neighbors, right? And those events are allowing us to educate or to transfer to the general community our feelings in a very simple way, right? For example, on what is the relationship between the way that we are using land or farming on climate, right? For example, or what we can do to better improve, cow health or welfare by using different farming practices or the way that we are managing cows, right? So I would say, education to the general public is a very important, component of what we do. It's not only about doing research or basic research, but it's at the same time finding ways to translate that information into some meaningful communication to general public, right? And that is our core mission in outreach here.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there a lot of what we've talked about is long term? Are there any short term implications that maybe you'd like to touch on, or anything
Yes.
that's implemented
Yes.
routinely?
So I will say this project, is very young, still young, right? So we've been working here for 3 years, right, at full research capacity, and I will say, and in those 3 years, several research findings, that we've been collecting or finding, were very important, right, for, I would say, industry and farmers in particular. So, as examples, I would say that our research innovations with regard to efficient use of automatic milking systems in a pasture-based setting, that was one of the highlights, I would say, of our work in the last 3 years. And for example, we've been disseminating most of that information through workshops that we've been offering right here at the station. So for example, we did one workshop on efficient use of automatic milking systems in pasture-based dairy farms in about 1 month ago, and we had about 50 people attending, right, personally, that workshop, and then about 20 people who were following that workshop online, right, through the web. Yeah.
Well, the dairy industry is very big here in Michigan. How many farmers are actually, or producers are actually using the pasture-based? Do you have any idea?
Good question. I would say nationwide is minor. Perhaps it's more the exception to the rule, right? And to give you general numbers, about 3% of the dairy farms, we can define them as true pasture-based, right, farms. And the definition of pasture-based dairy farms will be those farmers that are utilizing at least 50% of the land under perennial pasture systems, and those dairy farms where the forage resources from pastures represent at least 50% of the feed, right, of that cow throughout the year. So the percent is minor, but I would say the incorporation of pasture as a complementary feed resource for cows on dairy farms is growing, and I would say if we include those farms that are using pasture as a complementary feed resource, the numbers go up to 25, 30, right, percent. It's more opportunistic use of pastures, right?
So really what the future, where you're hopefully it's going in the future.
Yes, I will say is we try to generate information and alternatives so farmers can make informed decisions on what are the best choices, more cost-effective or profitable choices for their own situations, right?
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Is there anything else that you think would be important to touch on?
I don't know. I think we've been talking a little bit about everything. I'm not sure if it was so clear, perhaps the communication.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Good?
No, it was good.
And we've got good sound and everything? Okay, except for, they quieted down after a while, but at first it was...
So there was one thing that I missed that I would say
Okay.
is very important for us is when we've been touching a little bit on greenhouse gases and climate. A very important component in that line of work is what we did in the last 3 years is to innovate with the development, implementation and testing of a very novel system that allow us to quantify and monitor real time, right, all of the emissions from each individual cow that we have here in the herd. And that is a big step into future research work, right? So, and I think we are today the only facility, I let's say, around the world who is able to really track over time greenhouse gas emissions, enteric greenhouse gas emissions, so methane and carbon dioxide from each of the cows every day. Right?
From each of the cows. How many cows do you have?
Here we are milking today about 120 cows.
120.
So the volume of information is huge, but what is important is that that technique is allowing us to take one step further into the evaluation of carbon footprint analysis in dairy farms, right? Because the emissions from cows, mostly methane, represent more than 50%, right, of that greenhouse gas footprint, right, in dairy systems.